15. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. So Jesus told them this story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go to search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. When he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep." In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she will call in her friends and neighbors and say, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost coin." In the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, "I want my share of your estate now before you die." So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, 'Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant.'" So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son." But his father said to the servants, "Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found." So the party began. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. "Your brother is back," he was told, "and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return." The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, "All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf." His father said to him, "Look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found."
So I have been a Christian person my whole life. I was born into a Christian home. I was raised, baptized in the Roman Catholic Church. I went to private school through 8th grade. I had what I call, at least I called at the time, a kind of conversion experience in high school through an organization. And I've been following Jesus ever since. I have probably read my Bible every day for 30 years. I have 2 advanced degrees in theology. But in all of that journeying with God and in all of that training, I've had a handful of experiences in my life where I realized that what I thought about God, more specifically what I had been taught to think about God, and how I had actually experienced God in my life were not the same. They were very different. One of those examples years ago, I was talking to a friend on the phone, buddy of mine, non-Christian guy, and they had just had their first kid. And I think we had already had 2, if not all 3 of ours, so I was a little further along in my parenting journey than he was. And he was sharing the normal, highs and lows, laments and joys of just being a new first-time parent. And probably just, to empathize and enter into his experience, I made a joke, something like, oh, I hope our kids, someday will recognize how much they owe us, or something like that, right? And I expected him to just be like, oh, yeah. And he didn't. He kind of cut me off and he said, my son doesn't owe me anything. I owe him everything. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, yeah, he didn't choose to come into the world. That was my choice. I brought him here. I'm obligated to him. He deserves to have me give myself to him before he'll ever be capable of giving himself to me. And somewhere in my God-loving, Jesus-following, Bible-reading soul, something clicked. And I realized in that moment, that's absolutely right. That is absolutely right, but that is not how I've been taught to think about God. I was taught to think about God as someone to whom I owe everything, but who owes me nothing. God is someone to whom I owe everything, but he owes me nothing. And to some degree, there's some truth to that I owe God everything. But is it true that God owes me nothing? That God is not obligated to me? And I thought about that. I was like, well, no, that's exactly how I've experienced God. I've absolutely experienced God as someone who created me because God wanted to do that, and chose me because God wanted to do that, and has loved me because God wanted to do that, unsolicited, not because of anything I did. And then when I actually turn to the life of Jesus and to the stories in the Bible about God, it's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly how God presents himself. God just chooses people and he makes promises to them and he keeps his promises. God says to people, I will be faithful to you even if you are not faithful to me. God seems to have absolutely no problem obligating himself to people. And in fact, he seems to operate like he expects you to believe that and trust that and live in that. So it's one of those moments where what I theoretically believed to be true about God was not consistent with how I had actually experienced God in my life. That I realized I had been walking around with some cognitive dissonance regarding God. And in that moment, because of this challenging thing that my friend said to me, those things came together. And it's a very powerful moment when how you've experienced God and what you say you believe about God come together and are actually one and the same, and they're consistent. That was something that Jesus was trying to do with people all the time. So this is week 2 of a series I'm calling Ears to Hear. If you haven't been here, this is a simple idea. Jesus came to people 2,000 years ago. They weren't ready for him. The Apostle John opens his gospel by saying Jesus came to the world. He created, the world didn't recognize him. He came to his own people and they rejected him. Why? Why did people he create reject him? Well, it's because they'd been taught. They had been taught to think some things that were not true. But they didn't know that. They were absolutely convinced that they knew something they did not know. They carried around beliefs about what God's Savior would be like and what God's Savior would do. And so when Jesus showed up, they filtered everything he did and everything he said through those beliefs, not realizing that their beliefs were wrong and Jesus was right. You know, Jesus came to help them, came to save them. But it's very difficult. It is very, very difficult to help someone who already thinks they know something that they don't know. It's hard to help somebody who's in that state of affairs because it's hard to even begin the conversation. How do you even begin talking to someone who's convinced they've already got something figured out that they actually know nothing about? Well, what Jesus did was he used these fun stories called parables. He told people short stories. And one of the purposes of these short stories was not to just challenge what people believed. They did that. But more than that, they challenged people's posture about their beliefs, how you approach what you think. If you walked away from one of Jesus' parables not getting it, it wasn't because you couldn't get it. You weren't smart enough to understand it. It was often because something Jesus said challenged what you always believed or what you thought you were supposed to believe or what people taught you to believe. And so you walked away not liking it. Instead of believing what Jesus was telling you, you would hold on to what you'd always believed and you would reject what he was telling you. That happened to him all the time. And no topic was more important than the topic of God. Who is God? What do you believe about God? I've said this many, many times. It's an old quote from a theologian named A.W. Tozer, but what comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. What comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you because it touches every other dimension of your life. Jesus had to talk to people about God. And when you talk to people about God, you can only talk about God analogically, by comparison. You can only say things like, God is like. So all theological language is metaphorical. You have to use word pictures and images. And metaphors are great. They can reveal some things, but they can also conceal some things, especially if you push them too far. So just as a fun example, I just mentioned a few minutes ago, I moonlight as a bus driver, which makes me an employee of the school system. At the opening staff faculty meeting of the school year, I was present as a staff member, and the superintendent gave this short address, and he compared educators to farmers and students to, like plants. Educators, they sow the seed, they water the ground, they cultivate, all that kind of stuff. A perfectly good metaphor, one that Jesus used all the time. Perfectly good metaphor. But if you keep pushing it and stretching it too far, it can get obviously absurd. You can start asking questions like, well, what do we do when the plant's full grown? Well, we harvest it. Well, what does that mean? Well, I guess it depends on what crop you're talking about. If it's corn, you eat it. Or you sell it to someone else so that they can eat it. Neither of which we're going to do with children. So like a perfectly good metaphor. But if you stretch it a little too far, you can get into this place where that feels obviously absurd. And how do you know it's obviously absurd? You know because of your experience as a person in this world. That's how you judge, how you know a metaphor is right or how you know if it's been pushed too far. This happens to religious people all the time. I bet it happened to you. Religious people are taught by religious people to start with ideas. So you start with ideas, theories about God. So you're taught to believe certain things about God, and they're just theories, they're constructs, it's a system. What you're not taught to do is start with your experience. How have you experienced God in this world? But the reality is your experience it's all you got. It's how you access everything, even ideas and theories. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to start with your experience. And then you find language. Imperfect language, but it's all you got. You find language to describe your experience. Everybody does this. Everybody's supposed to do it. But a lot of times in religious circles, it gets worked the other way. You start with ideas that you're told you're supposed to believe, but those ideas are obviously, they're either bad metaphors or they've gotten pushed too far that create ways of thinking about God that are not right. So you spend your whole life thinking wrongly about God, not knowing that you're thinking wrongly. In fact, you might be thinking that you're thinking rightly. We used to call that idolatry. This is like a big deal. And it seems like that sort of thing was happening to the people to whom Jesus came. You just start asking yourself the question, how had they experienced God? In space and time, what was their experience of God? How did they know God in God's interaction with them? But to borrow a word from a Jewish rabbi named Abraham Heschel, they knew God as a God of pathos. The word means concern. They experienced God as someone who is deeply concerned about them, like a passionate parent. God created them, chose them, sustained them, protected them, taught them. God's so concerned about them that God refuses to excuse them when they make mistakes, when they do wrong. He's not going to just let that go. But so concerned about them, he's also never going to give up on them. No matter how many times they rebel, no matter how many mistakes they make, no matter how disrespectful they are, God keeps coming and saying, if you are unfaithful to me, I will stay faithful to you. That's how they know God, how they experience God. That's actually how everybody else knew their God. If you read this book, all of the neighboring nations, if they ran into an Israelite, it was like, oh, you're one of those people that has a God who cares about you. That's cool. I wish I had one of those. In the ancient world, gods didn't care about you. At best, they were ambivalent. If you lived or died, it didn't matter to them. But at worst, they were malevolent. They were vicious. They were capricious. But not Israel's God. Israel's God cared. He loved them. So their neighbors would say things like, who are these people? That they got a God who cares about them and walks with them. We've never seen anything like this. It is also why at the height of Israel's disobedience, God did not wipe them off the board. On the one hand, God was concerned that if he just destroyed his people, word might get out that he wasn't capable of saving them. And he wasn't comfortable with that rumor kind of spreading. But it was just as true that he didn't want people thinking he didn't care to save them, that he didn't want to, that they didn't matter enough to him to do it. They experienced God as a God who cares, who is concerned, like a passionate parent. But there is evidence to suggest that when Jesus hits the scene, that's not how they're thinking about God. They're thinking about God less like a passionate parent and more like a dispassionate judge. Right? God is one who has established some rules. There's a law. You got to keep it. If you don't keep it, you're out. If you do keep it, you're in. We saw in our last series when Jesus' forerunner, John the Baptist, when he hit the scene and started talking to people, there were people who said, hey, man, I'm a Jew. I'm a child of Israel, so I'm good. I'm safe. That's how they thought about it. God's like a judge, and there are criteria for acquittal. If you satisfy the criteria, you get all grace and acceptance. If you don't satisfy the criteria, you get nothing but judgment and condemnation. For them, the criteria was, well, you just have to be a Jew. If you're a child of Abraham, you're good. No matter how you live, it's all gravy. That's how some people thought about it. Or maybe it wasn't just you had to be a child of Abraham, a Jew. You had to be a good one. So like the religious leaders that Jesus is talking to in this passage that you heard this morning, those religious leaders, they obviously feel like, no, God has established a standard. There are some laws. There is a very particular way that you need to live your life. And if you live your life that way, like we do, you're fine. If you do not live your life that way, like they don't, then you're not good. So it's like good people, faithful people, sinners, scum of the earth over there. God wants nothing to do with them, and therefore, we should have nothing to do with them. Jesus, stop eating with them. So they had experienced God as a passionate parent, a God who's concerned, who loves them. But they'd come to think about God more like a dispassionate judge. And Luke says that it was for that reason that Jesus tells these stories. It is to get at how you think about God. Jesus is going to tell 3 consecutive stories to challenge their theoretical thinking about God. And he does it by reconnecting them to their experience with God. For the Good Shepherd, 99% is simply not good enough. The shepherd cares so much for every individual sheep that even if one wanders off, he's going to go find it. And Jesus looks at all the shepherds in the room and says, come on, shepherds, which of you would not do the same thing? And the shepherds start looking around and, actually, Jesus, we wouldn't do that. That's bad business. If I went wandering, if I went looking for every sheep that wandered off, I would risk the other 99 wandering off. I imagine most of them just wrote it off as a business loss and they moved on. But that isn't what God does, is Jesus' point. God doesn't operate that way. He didn't operate that way with you. Every single time you wandered off, who came looking for you? God did. Because 99% is not good enough. Or how about a woman who loses a coin? She's got 10. She loses 1. That coin is so important to her that she tears her house apart looking for it. And Jesus turns to all of the women in attendance and says, how about it, ladies? Wouldn't you do the same thing? And every woman in attendance is like, no, actually, we would not. Because we're not talking about $1 million coin here. We're talking about a drachma. It's the lowest base currency in the Roman Empire. It's hard to even know what it was worth or what you could buy with it because it had different value depending on who issued it. But it was probably closer to the value of a penny than a $100 bill. How many of you are tearing your house up to look for a penny? We don't even print them anymore. But that's Jesus' way of saying, but God does that. God did that with you. When you were lost, he came looking for you. He tore the world apart, coming for you. That's how God is. Or how about a dad with 2 sons? Okay, yeah, the father doesn't go looking for his son like the shepherd looks for the sheep or the woman looks for the coin. But not only does he let the son go, which is an act of grace in and of itself, I'll talk more about that in a second, but then he waits. And he waits, and he waits, and he waits. He puts his chair on the porch, and he keeps his eyes on the horizon, and he waits, hoping that any day his son will come to his senses and come home. And when that day actually happens, he throws a party. How many of you dads would do the same thing? You would. You want to know why? Because you've been influenced by Jesus in ways that you don't even know. But in their honor-shame culture, it is hard. It's hard for us to even get our brains around the level of sort of criminal disrespect that this was. In their world, as a child, your whole existence was tied to your parents. Your access to the world was through them. Everything was about how you respected and honored and followed your parents. That's why dishonoring your parents in their culture could be punishable by death, because that's how criminally damaging it was to their way of life. So for a son to do something like this, it's hard for us to get our minds around how disrespectful and damaging and hurtful and criminal this would have been to them in their minds. So when Jesus looks at the dads and says, dads, how many of you would do the same thing? I'm guessing most of the dads in attendance would have been thinking exactly the way the older brother is thinking. No, if that kid comes, well, 1, you definitely don't send him with a debit card. And 2, if he ever happens to come back, no, you do exactly what he says and you relegate him to a servant if you don't have him killed. But you see, that's not what God does. God had never been that way to them. So why would they ever think of God as being like this dispassionate judge where if you get the criteria right, you're good, but if you don't get the criteria right, you're not good. That isn't how they had experienced God. That's the point of these parables. Every one of them is about, it's like Jesus is looking at them and saying, here's how you think about God. I'm not really sure why, because here's how you've experienced him. So why don't we change the way that we think about God based on our experience? And you get that beautifully in the father's interaction with the older son, because it's the only time the dad talks. And you actually get some perspective here. When the older son finds out that his brother has come home and they're throwing this big party, he is not happy about that. And he does not want to go into the party. And so the dad comes out, and what does the dad say? Well, the son starts, I've always been here, and I've always worked hard, and I've always done everything that you've asked me to do. And you never threw a party for me. Does that sound like any of your kids? And the father looks at this son and says, Bud, man, everything I've got is yours. You've always been here with me. He doesn't use the words. But it's like what he's saying is, why are you thinking about me like that? If you had asked me for a party, I would have given you one. Because that's who I am. That's what I'm like. I'm guessing it's the same thing he was thinking and feeling when the younger son ran away. Why would you run away? Well, how have you come to think about me that you would want to leave this place? Certainly not how you've experienced me. How have you experienced me? As the one who gave you life and the one who provided for you a home and has loved you and given everything you could possibly need or want and has provided you with meaningful work. This is a place where you live in freedom and joy. But how had they come to think about him? Clearly, they had come to think about him as like, you got to do it this way or else. This is how it works. You get up, you got some chores to do, you get your chores done, keep your mouth shut, and everything's fine. And both sons react to that wrong thinking in different ways. The younger son is like, screw this, I'm out of here. I'm not living in this. But the older son, he stays and he does all the right stuff. He's going to obey all the rules, and he's going to be a good boy, and he's going to do everything that he's supposed to do and that he's told to do, only secretly he's going to hate every second of it. And he's going to resent his dad, and he's going to hate his brother. And it's like the father is saying to both sons, how did we get here? I don't understand. How did we get here? How is it that you came to think of me this way, that you would run away, and you would think that I'm some kind of like, slave master? How did we get here? And the truth is, the way you get there is you start thinking. You start with words and ideas rather than with your experience. This is how it works for us. And that's why Jesus' parables are still so powerful for us, just like they were powerful for them. How do we know God? How do you know God? In Christian orthodoxy, Christianity 101, how do you know God? You know God because of the Son he sent. We know God because of Jesus. Jesus is our experience with God. Christianity is a way of life that's based on a set of beliefs, but it is rooted in an experience. And that experience is Jesus. And when you look to Jesus, do you see dispassionate judge or do you see passionate parent? Do you see a God of pathos who cares, who's deeply concerned? Or do you see a God who's kind of ambivalent, who sort of sets the standard, and if you get it right, you're good, and if you don't get it right, you're not good? Right? You see a God who's pathos, who's passionate parent. But that's not how a lot of people, Christian people, are taught to think about God. It's not how I was taught to think about God. I was first taught to think, no, God has set a standard. There's a moral law, and you are supposed to keep it. And if you do not keep it, you deserve to be condemned. And because you didn't satisfy that criteria, God has done this other thing over here. He sent Jesus. This is now new criteria. So if you satisfy that criteria, well, then you're fine. So even though you don't satisfy this criteria over here, if you satisfy this criteria, well, then you're okay. But if you don't accept Jesus, well, then we're back to you not being okay again. That's how I was taught to think about God. God is a judge. God has set the standard. If you get the standard, you're good. If you don't get the standards, you're bad. Standard's different for us than it was for them, but that's how I was taught to think about it. And I'm guessing on some level you were taught to think that way too, but that is not how you've experienced God. That's not how you've experienced God. You've experienced God as a passionate parent. You've experienced God as pathos, as concern, as someone who created you in love, has sustained you in love, promises to redeem you in love. You have had experiences in your life where you were deeply unfaithful to him and he was faithful to you. That is the definition of a passionate parent. The parable, the purpose of it is to bring those things back together. Stop thinking about God in ways that are weird and strange and are not consistent with how he actually operates, and just start thinking about God in terms that you actually see and experience in the person of Jesus. So what does that mean for judgment? You know, Luke doesn't record a back and forth after Jesus tells this story, but I like to imagine there was one. And I can just imagine one of these religious people who thinks they know something they don't know as soon as Jesus is done with that third story. What are you saying, Jesus? What are you saying, God doesn't judge people? Are you saying people can just do whatever they want and it's fine? Do you know how many times I have heard that from somebody? I can imagine people listening to Jesus and just, they don't even ask, they just walk away. Oh, he said God doesn't judge people. Everybody can just do whatever they want. It'll be just fine. It'll be all Shangri-La in the end. Whatever. Do you know how lazy that is? You think you know something that you don't actually know. Someone says something that you don't like or that you don't understand or that you've never heard before. And instead of leaning in, you just go, what? People do this all the time. I cannot tell you how many times I've experienced this. You think there's no judgment here? This parable, especially that third one, has got judgment written all over it. It's just not the judgment of a judge. It's the judgment of a dad. And they're different. You think if my kid came to me and said, Dad, I wish you were dead, I want your money and I'm leaving? What do you say? What could you possibly do? I can't keep you here if you don't want to be here. All there is you wanting to be here. That's all this is. Guys, all faith, Christian faith is a God who wants you and is waiting around on the front porch for you to want him back. That's all it is. And so if you don't want it, God's not going to keep you in it. You don't think that dad was sitting there heartbroken, thinking, man, how did we get here? Well, I hope you don't leave, but because I know what you're going to do if you do, because I know you. I know you're not ready for that world. I know if I give you my money, I know exactly what you're going to do with it. But if you don't want me, if you don't want to be here, I can't keep you here. If you are hell-bent on living this life without me, hell is exactly what you're going to get. Not a hell that I make for you. It'll be a hell you make for yourself. You will go out into this world and you will live the way you know how to live. And you will get everything that you think you want. And that's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. But there is nothing I can do about it. So if you want to go, go. But before you leave, and I'm going to give you a head start. Before you leave, I want you to know I will be sitting right there. And if it takes forever for you to finally come to your senses and come home, I will be right there waiting for you. This father doesn't say to the son, hey, you might want to think about that because, once you make this choice, there's no going back. It is forever sealed. Nothing I'll be able to do about it. The door will be locked when you come home. Father doesn't say that because that's not true. If the son walks away, it is true. The door will be locked. It'll be locked from his side for as long as he wants it to be locked. But whenever he decides he doesn't want it to be locked anymore, the dad will be there lovingly waiting for him. And that is exactly how they had experienced God, but not how they'd thought about him. One of my great concerns as a pastor is that people are walking around thinking things about God that are just not true. They're not true. You may have been taught to believe them by some religious person that thought they were doing a good thing or a faithful thing, but they're not true. And you can lean into your own experience and know that they're not true. That is not how God has engaged you. The purpose and the power of these parables is to bring your thinking back into alignment with your experience, so that the God that you say you know, that you say you believe in, is the actual God who is, who you know through Christ and who you know in your lived experience. And when you do that, that is a remarkably powerful thing. It has the power to transform your life, to reshape everything about you. That's why Jesus tells them these stories. The invitation to you, the challenge to you is, are you going to let Jesus challenge you in the way that you think about God? Are you going to let his life and his teachings about God challenge the way that you've kind of always thought about God? Or are you going to be that kind of person who's like, but wait a minute, I was always taught to think this, and you're going to try to hold on to that? God is not a dispassionate judge. God is a passionate parent, a God of pathos. Deeply concerned for you. Always has been and always will be. We're going to finish our service this morning by taking communion together. If you are new here, this is your first time with us, the communion table is our weekly opportunity to be reminded of this, that our God is a God of pathos, a God of unfailing love and faithfulness, the God who breaks his own body and sheds his own blood for people, just like you. Not because you somehow made him do it, because that's his choice, his obligation to you, his commitment to you. And when we come forward and we take these elements, it's our way of participating in that. Of saying, I want to go home. I want the God who wants me. I'm going to go into the party. I'm not going to stand outside. So if you're here this morning and that's how you're feeling, right? If there's a little flicker of flame in you that's like, you know what? I want the God who wants me. That's enough. That's all it takes. That's enough. I invite you to come and join us. Come to the table. Be a part of the church. That's what this is. It's just people who are trying to want the God who wants them. We're trying to be faithful to God who's faithful to us. In just a minute, I'll invite you all to stand with me if you're able. If you want to participate, we dismiss starting in the back row. So just come down our center aisle. We will have communion distributors on both sides of our stage. They will say to you the body and blood of Christ. I invite you to say amen. And then you can take from them a prepackaged communion cup. Just take that back to your seat using the side aisles, and then you can take those elements during this last song as you feel led. I'll come up in a couple minutes, and I'll close our time. If you want the God who wants you, then come to the table. Be a part of the church. I invite you to stand with me. Let me pray. I invite you to come forward. God, we do recognize through your son Jesus that you are a God of pathos, that you are deeply concerned, like a passionate parent. You love us. You love us. You love us enough to judge us. You love us enough to heal us. You love us enough to search, and you love us enough to wait. Thank you. Thank you that you are that way toward us. Forgive us for thinking about you in ways that are so wrong, and for all of the ways that damages our soul and our life and our relationships. Pray that you would bring our thinking back into alignment with our experience. We love you and thank you for your goodness toward us. Continue to do a good work in us as we come forward and express our desire for you in response to your desire for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Lines are drawn when you're in or out, when it's us or them, and we shame the doubt. It is all a lie. All we ever really need is love. There's no need to shed more blood. Look upon the cross. Look upon the cross. See the face of Christ. See the mercy in his eyes. Every valley shall be lifted high. Now our enemies are rest, and the heavy laden rest. For his judgment is love. His judgment is love. There is no more guilt. There is no more shame. All our darkest sin, all our deepest pain. Blessed are the poor, all the lonely, broken, lost, and torn. See, a kingdom comes to us, a war that's fought with love. Our only war is love. Prepare the way of the Lord, wielding mercy like a sword. Every mountaintop will be made low. He holds the earth like dust, and his judgment comes to us, and his judgment is love. His judgment is love. We will not fight their wars. We will not fall in line. 'Cause if it's us or them, it's us for them, it's us for them. We reject the either or. You can't define us anymore. 'Cause if it's us or them, it's us for them, it's us for them. 'Cause if it's us or them, it's us for them, it's us for them. Prepare the way of the Lord, wielding mercy like a sword. Every mountaintop will be made low. No, he holds the earth like dust, and his judgment comes to us, and his judgment is love. May our judgment be love.
God is not dispassionate judge. God is passionate parent. That means God is a God of love. God judges, but God's judgment is love. And that should simultaneously be encouraging to you and terrifying. Sometimes love is as gentle as a whisper, and it is as fierce as a fire. And there's only one person who knows how to express that rightly for you and for your well-being, and that's God.